Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of world events, specifically the ongoing war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its NATO proxy forces. We are also continuing to cover the continued breakdown of the civil discord in the ununited States of America, and we'll continue to cover that as the elections occur and things continue to spiral out of control in the United States, or the ununited States, however you want to call it to this point. Now, the war continues between the Russians and the Ukrainians. You know, most people believe that, or at least the uninformed urbanite here in the United States and certain parts of Western Europe, they believe that the battle lines that right now exist between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces are essentially static, that it has, right now we're looking at more or less a World War I style of conflict. And that's fairly far from the truth. The battle lines are moving, and it really depends on where the Russians are deciding to attack. Now, right now, we are seeing activity across the entire line of contact. Now, the most heaviest fighting is taking place just to the south of Pokrovsk, this area here. And what we're seeing, as I've talked about in the previous episode, is the expansion of this salient, this bulge here that protrudes out towards Pokrovsk. And eventually the Russian military objective, the war goal, war aim, will be the envelopment and or seizure of Pokrovsk, thus eliminating a key transportation hub for the Ukrainian military. Now, in order to do that, to prevent Ukrainian counterattacks on what was a fairly narrow salient, the Russians are expanding the salient. And if we go and we look at areas across the entire line of contact, specifically just to the south by southwest of Pokrovsk, and we look at what has happened over the course of the last few days. Now watch this very closely. This was the start of October. Fast forward. Okay, these are not static lines of contact. What is happening is a very methodical process by Russian forces to degrade and destroy the Ukrainian army. And we're watching that on a daily basis. Again, these lines are not static. This is not a static conflict. This is a conflict of progress for Russian forces. At the same time, the Kursk incursion up to the north. Again, in all probability, the war goal of the Ukrainians was a rapid push north by northeast towards the actual city of Kursk, and or to threaten the power plant to the west of Kursk. Russian blocking formations have prevented that from happening. And again, as we see, this is a very linear campaign by Russian forces to collapse this Kursk pocket. And you can see it slowly getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, that's a problem for Ukrainian forces, because what are the Ukrainians doing? The Ukrainians do not have an air force. They have much less artillery than the Russian military. Much less. So no air force, much less artillery, and you have between 4 and 11 combat brigades participating in this combat operation that are essentially hunkered down in Kursk Oblast getting attacked by Russian glide bombs and Russian multiple launch rocket systems and heavy artillery. Yes, there are occasional infantry engagements that are occurring, but by and large, the casualties are coming from the Ukrainian side. Look, the Russians are simply hunkering down. They move to contact with the platoon or company-sized element. They figure out exactly where the Ukrainians are, and in many cases, Russian satellite technology can identify, and drone technology can identify where the Ukrainians are. And then they use their Air Force, and they use their artillery, they use their Iskander ballistic missiles to then attack those Ukrainian positions. No, the Russians are not sending battalions of quote-unquote meat waves against Ukrainian forces. That is not what is happening. That's what the mainstream media wants you to believe is happening, because that's the only positive outcome at this point the Western media and the Ukrainian state has to try to portray some sort of victory. And there is no victory. These Ukrainian brigades, again, hunker down and day in and day out are getting hammered by Russian artillery and glide bombs. And eventually they'll break, probably with the onset of a winter, and this entire Kursk pocket will collapse. Right now, quite frankly, I think that this Kursk pocket is actually a benefit to the Russian military. Why do I think that? Well, simple. You have a multitude of Ukrainian brigades in this pocket. Okay? These brigades are not moving forward. They're not capturing territory. They're in no position whatsoever to threaten Kursk, the city. They're in no position to threaten transportation arterial routes inside the Russian Federation. So they're just stagnant, and they're just sitting there. And the Russians are perfectly okay with sealing this pocket off and just killing Ukrainian troops day in and day out with artillery and glide bombs. And that's what's happening. So it benefits the Russians to have Ukrainian forces in this pocket that are, for reasons we can't even fathom at this point, why they're trying to keep a hold on this area. And again, it's just essentially causing the Ukrainians to bleed out. Slowly, heavily, whatever that is, I can guarantee you, with the airstrikes and the amount of artillery that the Russians have, that the casualties for the Ukrainians are higher. And any casualties that are higher for the Ukrainians are going to benefit the Russian military, because the Russian military can replenish much faster than the Ukrainian military. It has much more of a production capacity than the Ukrainian military. So I don't buy the media reports that indicate that the Russians are losing thousands of troops in this Kursk pocket. I actually think it's the other way around, and it's just not really being discussed. And I think for reasons of a political nature, and to be able to say, hey, look, we occupy a Russian territory, I think the perceived benefit of being able to say that, they believe that justifies the cost in Ukrainian forces. And I think they're making a huge, the Ukrainians and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization are making a huge mistake in what they're doing in terms of a military, both strategic and even a tactical aspect of what's happening in the Kursk Oblast, the Kursk incursion, the Kursk pocket. And again, back to this area here where the Donbass offensive continues. This is not static. These are days. Not a static conflict. And you got to remember, every time the Russians move forward, when you see this forward movement by Russian forces, These are not meat wave attacks. These are not human wave attacks. These are small, specialized groups of Russian forces that move forward. They identify Ukrainian positions, and they hammer the living hell out of it. I'm telling you, the Ukrainians are taking more casualties in this conflict than the Russians are. And for whatever reason, just like the elections here in the United States, the un-United States, the mainstream media is trying to spin this a different way. And it's going to eventually lead to the collapse of the Ukrainian military. It's going to happen. Absolutely. So that is our coverage for today. We will continue to monitor, report, bring you the truth, the whole truth, and yes, nothing but the truth. Have a good day.